But Ryan, you know what? When you're not there yourself, how can you expect others to really understand it? So I didn't listen to the counsel I was given by one of my closest friends who said, dude, you need 6 months off. And I laughed in his face because I was a workaholic. I loved doing what I was doing. Why would I stop and take half of a year for myself? I thought that was selfish.
Welcome to Authentic Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan James Miller, and I believe the way to freedom, fulfillment, and success ultimately comes by living as the most authentic version of yourself. If you're ready to live the life you've dreamed of, you're in the right place.
What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Authentic Conversations. We are in a new season. We're creating new opportunities, particularly for men to hear what being a man is all about. And we're pulling at that from all different walks of life, all different shapes and sizes and backgrounds. And so today is another one of those opportunities. I will let him do a little bit more of an introduction, but on the other end of the audio or video, however you're taking this in, is a good buddy of mine by the name of John Troutman. And John and I met about 2 years ago now, just kind of randomly, some people would say, but John and I would agree that it was divinely coincidental that we would run into each other in Las Vegas at an insurance conference of all things. And we just hit it off. We dug into a great conversation. I would say, and I think he would agree, that we've become good friends over the last couple of years and shared in some war stories. And so I'm pumped to dig into his life a little bit and to have him share some of the wisdom and experience that he has. But for now, what up, dude? How are you?
Oh, man, Ryan, this is such a total honor to be on this program. You have become like a brother to me. And again, I don't believe in coincidence. And, you know, that time we first met, I mean, I was at a very different place. And to be totally transparent here, I really believe that I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that first meeting. And just so grateful to you, your willingness to take me under your wing and challenge me and speak truth and get me to a better trajectory, both in business and life. So again, great to be with your audience and with you here today. Thanks.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. No, I mean, you like I'd said, you've just become such a good friend and, somebody that, we've shared in some, very deep conversation with. And I think that's important. I mean, whether it's in the context of what we're going to talk about today or just in general, I think that, in many ways, through business, through marriage, through parenting, just life in general, and especially in the context of the culture that we live in today. I mean, we are going to war every single day. And if we don't have people that are standing alongside us and even sometimes going before us, we can get into a lot of deep shit right away. So, it's great to have, brothers to walk that with. So why don't you just give, a little bit of a brief background for everybody else on who you are, because I think that will give some context to some of the things that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. So I was a pastor for a few months, sort of 20 years at the same church, same place, a congregation of around 400 people. And like the host of this show, I could never treat an individual like a number. I still to this day genuinely care for every connection I have. But through the course of 20 years, to make a very long story abbreviated here, that loss of going through over 40 funerals and in 1 year alone of doing over 14 funerals. One was my best friend in life who died on a treadmill. I lost my father-in-law. I lost 2 grandparents and very key members of the community who in many ways were a part of my life. So I'm a high D, high I personality type out there for you people who understand DISC. So always being driven and self-motivated. That was a real challenge for me to handle because I just kept pushing and I burned out. I was told to take a 6-month break and that was a joke in my mind. And again, to keep this to the point and very brief here, I had to go through incredibly dark seasons of burnout to understand that I needed to get the help. I needed to get mental health attention and take care of myself before I could take care of others. So I got into sales. I can go into this a little more deeper if you have those kind of questions, but part of that journey was being told by a CFO that my resume was the equivalent of a stay-at-home mom. And I don't mean any disrespect to moms out there, but that was a definite low point in my life, but a great challenge. So I've been a big believer that progress sometimes is a snail step. And I leveraged that in about 10 different sales positions to get to where I am today. Chuck Mazzetti took me under his wing early on 7 years ago and said, hey, you've been an accomplished speaker as a pastor. Why not do some trainings, present presentations for us? And that's what I started doing on the side, in addition to sales roles. But through the course of that relationship and helping them with things, in my success in sales and other businesses, they brought me in full-time in business development. So I can look employers, I can look brokers in the face and talk about burnout from experience. I'm not a clinician, but I know it happens when you push yourself too far and don't take care of yourself. So that's the snapshot, brother. But to where I am today, and again, from a coaching standpoint, listening, trying to implement your advice and counsel, both in business and life, has been incredibly helpful in improving my trajectory. So that's the snapshot, man.
And in addition to that, right, husband, father to 3 kids, right? 3?
4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls.
4 kids. That's right. Yeah. So no, you're never short on responsibility. You give up one and you take on another. I also think that while obviously you served far longer in a pastoral role than I did, I do find it quite fascinating that you stepped out of that role because you were burnt out and you chose to get into a sales role, which is one of the quickest ways to burn yourself back out.
I'm a glutton for punishment, brother.
Seriously. So if you hear anything from this, just know that's John. If you need someone to get to the front and just grind it out, John's your guy. That's good. Okay, so I'm going to actually pull back on some of what you said because I think it's really helpful. But to set the tone for this conversation, I've had some interesting feedback when I ask this because people try and perfect it, and I just don't know how you can do that. But for you, if somebody was to ask you, what, we'll take like the clean gender role aside, how would you define a man or manhood?
Yeah. So taking ownership of your life, of your relationships, and your job in respect to everyone else around you. I could go on and define that differently and more fine tune it if you like. But in today's world, where men are encouraged to take a back seat, where they're encouraged to stay on the bench, when they're told to step aside. And a lot of times, well, any time in leadership, when there is a void of leadership, someone else is going to fill it. So I think a big challenge today is that men just need to step up, take ownership of all that's their life and those around them. And a lot better things can be going on. Yeah,
it's so good. I mean, I get in a lot of trouble when I say things like that I'm about to say, but that's okay. I feel like a big part of why the world is in the place that it is because men in general have failed the world. During the course of my lifetime, I think that I saw a reasonably balanced definition of manhood and men taking responsibility. I think that was probably post-war, just that leaking into even maybe my generation, which I guess I would be Generation X, kind of on the cusp there. And then we moved into this generation of toxic masculinity. And I understand that there was a lot of overreach. There was a lot of domineering. It was very, very aggressive. And so we've seen the pendulum swing back though so far. I think guys ran away from toxic masculinity, but because it was good to do that. But in doing so, they didn't come back to the middle. They just, and you said it, right? I mean, just went and took a seat. And some of that is the narrative that is playing out in other areas of culture. But, I just feel like men in general have failed society today because they're just watching. They're not, like you said, they're not stepping up. They're not protecting. They're not providing. It's so disgusting to see where we are as men in the world today. And again, that's a big generality. And I know that there are a lot of men that are doing well and taking charge in the right ways, but it's a fraction of what it could be.
Can I just follow up on something you said?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
So to greater explain what I'm talking about is that total ownership piece, because I'm going to lead with one of my greatest failures, brother. And that is I didn't take ownership of my emotions. I thought because I was a man, because I was that, hey, you can't tell on this interview, but I'm 6'5", 284. People see this larger than average figure. And, it's that man, it's that false thing of manhood. Oh, I can't let people see me cry. Guess what? I've learned the hard way. I'm going to be that man that's in the back row of the church crying during that worship song. I'm going to be that man that cries in the theater during that movie that touches your heart. But guess what? I'm also going to bust it in the gym and probably do better than the other guys my age around me. That's okay. That's what I'm talking about. Ownership is learning to be okay to express your emotions. Too many men are concerned about what others think. Who cares? We need to deal with our emotions. They're there for a reason. And you know what? Truth be told, they're like a barometer of our lives. And I turned that barometer off and never processed death. But I believe there's a slew of people that are listening to this today that have captured their emotions, bound them and not released them, and they're not handling them. And that barometer is going all over the place because they've never addressed the storm that's raging inside.
Man, that's so good. And if you're paying attention and heard that, rewind that, listen to that clip again. If you're hearing me say, pay attention, and you're like, to what? You need to rewind, you need to re-listen to that clip again. I mean, it's so true. And it's so scary because, obviously men and women, again, generally operate pretty differently emotionally. And that's fine. That's the way that God intended it to be. What we typically see from men is when they continue to harbor and shelter and compartmentalize, whether it's sadness or shame or anger or anything else, before long, it becomes uncontrollable. And the natural reaction for almost every single man, because we all get into that fight or flight, is we act out in rage. We act out in anger. And that comes across to our families, to our friends, to the community, to the general public. I mean, it's why we see guys absolutely lose their minds more often than anything else, is because they haven't been taught to or haven't chosen to learn how to deal with those emotions, right? I mean, it's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. And the thing that the real challenge there, and in particularly in burnout, and I understand every case is different. I'm not going to assume that a person who's listening to this today who's struggling with burnout is identical to my situation, but it combines your personality profile, and now you act that out in the most heinous way. So because I'm a high D, high I, I'm now passionately driven to cause chaos in my home. And in that time, because I didn't deal with those things and I didn't address the pain, I didn't address the loss, and I just kept going on to the next thing, I acted out and I destroyed almost all my relationships. I destroyed my character in a community, which I invested everything short of my soul in for 2 decades. And there's no rebuilding some of those things, not to mention what goes on in a person's body, right? Do you know those wellness wheels we see that show all those things that happen in unchecked or unmanaged stress? I almost had everything on that entire sheet. And it's not funny, but I can laugh at it now, but it was as close to hell as I hope I ever come. But here's the worst part. It wasn't just me. Those ripples were going out to my kids, my wife, my community, my extended family. And those were things I wasn't even paying attention to because my barometer was so screwed.
Yeah. You brought up a couple of times DISC, and I think that more people today don't know what that is than do. I think that was something that was extremely popular probably during our generation of, getting into the professional world. But, for most, I'll call them personality assessments, just kind of simply. And the Enneagram is probably the biggest one of today. And the Enneagram does a better job than most of the ones previous to it did. But I think that a lot of times what happens is whether a guy just says, well, I'm a man and this is what I do, or we take those assessments and they demonstrate the character of who we are, the nature of who we are, how we act, how we behave, then we just accept that as fact, right? And so it's, my personality assessment shows that I am an overly aggressive person, or I'm extremely outspoken. So that's just the way I am. And what I've noticed over time is because, I don't know, 25 years ago, I think when I first took the disc, I was high D, high I. And what's been interesting over time is I would probably still test exactly the same. It's been a long time since I've done that. But one thing that the Enneagram showed when I went through it with the facilitator, which was different than just me taking it myself, was it showed what my natural tendencies were, but it also showed how over time I have been able to transform those to become more positive because I'm aware of the negative aspects of those things. So I think that what you're talking about is so important, and something that you've learned over the course of your career, and obviously we're still learning, is just because we're a certain way doesn't mean we have to stay that way, right? We can learn to behave and operate differently than we're told we have to because, again, we're a certain way.
Right. Yeah, again, quoting Sun Tzu here, understanding your strengths of yourself and your opponent, understanding your weaknesses in yourself and your opponent. So sales isn't just about understanding our competitors, it's about understanding where we lack, right? But we need to take that to the personal level. What's that? Where's John's greatest strengths? But those greatest strengths are going to be my greatest weakness as well, because the sword goes both ways. So understanding what are the pitfalls of being a D or the pitfalls of being an I or S or a C, right? Because the sword does strike both ways.
Oh, so true. So true. Okay. Reaching back into your past. And so you went 20 years in a pastoral role, and that was where you experienced the greatest bit of burnout. As I'm sure as you got closer to the end, the burnout got greater, the tension, the stress, the pressure. So I'm really curious, where were the guys around you? And if they were around you, what were they saying as you were starting to either verbally express or, even just in body language and action, starting to express the characteristics of somebody that just wasn't okay?
Yeah. So unlike a Purdue turkey, there's no button that pops out that says burnout, right? So, right. Or anything like that. The symptoms vary. And again, this is a person-to-person thing. So again, hindsight's 2020. I can tell you looking back that I did not feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it. I never was at a place like that before. Again, I was having anxiety attacks daily. I was leaving my house and going to my office and just starting to cry for no reason at all, not realizing it was because the multiple homes of the people whose funerals I had done that never had time to process those. And the people who saw me just in a different way were just saying to me, is everything okay? They were asking questions. They didn't know either. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't real obvious signs until I started making extreme major life changes in decision-making, both in relationship, in money, making expenses on things. And my wife was the first to know. But when it got to that point, quite frankly, it was really too late. So I was advised by family to go to get counseling. But when you're a high D, and again, there was transitions going on at my church, and I was going to be, I was actually the new senior pastor after that course of time. And now all that responsibility, who's going to take 6 months off when you're just being brought in, right? So, I want to make this clear. There was a season of my life I was incredibly bitter towards those who had passed false judgment in many ways. But Ryan, you know what? When you're not there yourself, how can you expect others to really understand it? So I didn't listen to the counsel I was given by one of my closest friends who said, dude, you need 6 months off. And I laughed in his face because I was a workaholic. I love doing what I was doing. Why would I stop and take half of a year for myself? I thought that was selfish.
Okay, so before you move right from there, and I hate to interrupt a good train of thought, but that is something that's so critical for people to hear, because I think there is, and I heard a little bit of this too, but one side of it, and many people may go through the experience of there weren't people around that were being let in, or that just were jumping in to try and help you figure out what was going on. But I think that what you just expressed right there is something that is probably more consistent with a lot of the quote unquote high performing individuals that we're interacting with, just because of our desire to be successful. And so somebody said to you, something is wrong, you need to do something about it. And your response was generally, right, I got this, I can deal with it. Like that, I've been here before, I can deal with this again. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes that I've made in my life, that I continue to make in my life, even now. Like I haven't experienced a massive disaster of some sort, thank God, in a few years. But even in the small things, there's just too many times when my wife or a friend is like, dude, you need to chill out. And I'm like, no, just push through, I'll get it. And there's wisdom sometimes in just grinding through, right? We don't have to take a step back every time something gets hard. But I think that when your nature is to bulldoze, you need to be more open to people saying, time to take a break.
Exactly. And that's very hard for me. And again, being totally transparent here to this, this is not something I can cross off my list, right?
Right.
This is something. So I am, and I follow your thought process and how you coach people to success is not a destination or point, but I have been that way my whole life. You can't see it here. I'm a hunter. I've got Pope and Young, trophies on my walls. Those were life goals and objectives. And I'm not bragging about it, but that's just the person I am. If I set a goal, I'm going to get there. I'm going to find a way to get there. So when I got to my position and someone said, stop, why would it just was so foreign to me, because I never went through burnout before. But having been there, I take my stops moving forward.
That's good. That's so good. And again, your case was, that you're clearly calling burnout and was of a significant magnitude. I think a lot of people that are hearing this and will hear this aren't there. It's not that everybody is at the end of themselves, right? Like, God ripped every possession that I had worked so hard for away from me to teach me that there was something more important than money. God ripped a friend from me and almost took my wife from me in order for me to really see how valuable relationships were, even though I already saw them as so valuable. So there's the extreme, but then sometimes, again, it's just the small little things that we need to be better about paying attention to, because there's somebody out there right now that is working their ass off during the day, every single day. They're going home, there's smiles at home. It's pretty good all the way around, but they lay their head on their pillow at night and they're like, gosh, I don't know when I'm going to get out of this and move on to the next thing. And even that alone, I believe, begins that period of, I'm just going to work a little bit harder. I'm just going to push a little bit more. I'm going to sacrifice a little bit more of this in my life to move it over to here. And again, individually, those things aren't bad. But when it starts creating this burden in us and so much stress in us, before long, we're 70 miles off course and we don't know how to get back.
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion out there today about mental health, right? It's on the forefront, it's on the papers, it's on the magazines, it's in the benefit, magazines. But the difference is, my question is, what's being done? We're doing a lot of talking about it, but what's being done? We take our cars, depending on your make and model and all that. Every 5,000, 10,000 miles, that car's going in. Whatever happened about regular maintenance for your mental health? I'm just going to go talk to somebody. It's going to be on my calendar. I'm going to do this. Instead, we wait until the fire's burning and we're feeling like we're a little fried. And so for that person out there, it's not selfish to go talk to somebody about mental health and to schedule that on a regular basis and just do a checkup for your own mental well-being. And that's something that we need to do and stop talking about. I mean, we see that, and I see that in sales. The amount of proposals that we are getting now compared to before is insane. But people aren't making decisions on adding those services the way you would think. It's not in proportion because, well, we just want to hold the line. And I understand that. And I'm not condemning any business owner out there for those decisions. I get that. But at some point, we need to act and be proactive with people's mental health and talk about these difficult topics so that people don't damage their company and their house.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I mean, for me, I was deep into this most recent kind of sprint season of my life, and I knew that I was about to explode. I wasn't losing it. There was nothing in it, really bad. It just, I knew it was coming. And so thankfully, God brought somebody to me that opened my eyes to this mastermind that I could become a part of. And they're focusing on 5 areas: so professional, personal, relational, financial, and spiritual. And it's so fascinating because I'm on a call, once a week with this group of 8, 10, 12 guys, depending on who can make it. Most of them are way more successful than I am. We're definitely talking about business structure and operation and growth and things like that. But so much of it turns into, how are you doing? Like, you just experienced a loss of somebody close to you. What's that like for you right now? How are you processing that? Or you're really burdened by what's going on. Are you okay? How are you dealing with that? And that alone has been such a huge refresher, because I know that I have a place that I can go, that I can trust them, that I can open up, that I can share. And I'm listening to other people do the same thing. So it doesn't feel like I'm the only one in the midst of all these guys that are out there with all their shit together and I'm a big mess,
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I learned coming out of there too, is, if you want to go far, build a team. You want to go fast, go solo. And, I'm a long game. I'm a long range thinker, and I try to plan for way down the road. And coming out of burnout, that's something that I did. I pay more attention to you now. I pay more attention to people like Andy Neary and others out there. I have a person like Gary Weavido, a person who, loves God, loves people, and is a successful business person, who I give him sole access to my spiritual universe, if you will, to challenge me and just to text me anytime and saying, dude, how's the barometer? Where is it at? And I gave him the keys, if you will, to help keep me on the road, because left unchecked, I'm capable of hitting the repeat button, and I just don't want any part of that. Yeah,
that's good. So as you think about, and we're getting, I guess, ready to land the plane here, but, sometimes I'm having to drive a lot of these questions. I think, through this, we've heard the thread of, how you have experienced struggle with emotion and vulnerability, and how you've grown through that, and how you have denied outside counsel, and now you've brought that into your life. I think that those, we've seen this trajectory of growth. And at the same time, you said that, you're still very, very heightened in your awareness for the possibility for things like that to happen, because in many ways you're still the same person. So as you look forward out the next year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, how do you feel like you're going to continue to shape yourself in such a way that is going to better model what you're modeling today?
Yeah, so allowing trusted voices to speak truth into your life. That includes business, right? So my personality, I wanted to do it my way. Yes, I was a team leader and I was involved in that. But in the end, I had my own way and style. But allowing, and not every voice is a trustworthy voice. Not every expert, not every guru is worthy to be followed. But finding those credible people who can be not just listen and apply, but to be accountable to. Accountability is huge. So I have chosen, it's a choice. I've chosen to daily be accountable to people. I've chosen to allow people like yourself, quite truthfully, to enter into my universe and to tell me things that I may not want to hear. So I'm going to include them in my journey moving forward, and I'm not going to let them go. So they've been a part of that transition, and that's a big part of my success in business and life.
Yeah, no, man, I think that's so good. And, as people are listening out there, probably one of the things that they're going to then ask is, so how do I find people like that? And how do I lay out the parameters for, how I want them to operate? So do you have any advice that you have taken on in terms of, again, kind of finding it and then managing it in such a way that you're getting the right people at the right time?
Yeah. So, it goes without, well, maybe it doesn't go without saying, so I'll just state it and probably have to apologize to you later. But there's two people right here. There's two people right here. That person out there who's got an issue or whatever, there's two people right here. We got Ryan Miller and John Troutman, two people who could be willing to take a call or a direct message or something. So that person who's believing a lie, thinking nobody's out there, you're instantly wrong, because there's two right here. So from that circle, again, we can't take 10,000 calls or do all of that, but
I can. Just kidding. Just kidding.
So everybody has somebody, right? And if nothing else, if you don't think you have anybody, that's an issue where I would really encourage talking to a counselor, because maybe something else is going on. Talking to that skilled person in trust, who's going to be and keeping confidentiality before you go anywhere else, because maybe there's some other things going on that you need to address before you find that friend, because not everybody you got a friend on Facebook is really a friend.
It's good. That's so good. Yeah. I love that. And I think it's so important that, you communicated what you did, just around the idea that, there are people out there that really do care. And it's hard. I think that as men, and I'm sure women deal with many of the same things, but as men, we're dealing with a lot of past experience coupled with present reality. On top of that, a whole host of shame and embarrassment, because when we desire to have it all together and then there's things that are falling apart, those become the worst things to open up and talk about. We carry a lot of pride with us, and rightfully so. The good type, but that can be a weapon used against us when we're trying to humble ourselves enough to open up to other people. And so I understand that there's a lot of struggle to reach out, to open up. But I appreciate what you said. There are people out there, and you said, you are including yourself in that. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do, is just be there for somebody else and listen. And we may not have an answer at all. And sometimes it's just listening. Other times it's just pointing them in the direction of somebody else that can help them. But if you do not reach out, if you do not ask for help, if you do not communicate that you need help, then I hate to say this, but it's your fault. And you are going to continue to have to own the mistake you're making and not opening up and allowing other people in. And that's the mistake you need to own. Outside of that, everything else you can grow through, you can learn from. But if you're not willing to go first, you're in a world of hurt. So good words, man.
Well, if I can just say one more thing here, I want to put the blame on me from my past, because for too long, I thought people put people in ministry too high on a pedestal. I don't agree with that. It's the people in that position that allowed them to think that way. I wasn't as transparent as I could have been. I wasn't as clear about my weaknesses. I wasn't telling people where I really needed some help. And I wasn't willing to get the help where I needed it either. And so to that person out there, this is a broken world. There is no perfect person. There was only two who walked on water, and they both got crucified. So just think about that. We all are broken. We all could talk to a counselor. So it's not showing that you're weak. It's actually showing that you're strong and you're willing to own and be that responsible individual for the great things that God's given you.
That's a good word. That's how we end it, man. John, that was awesome. Again, you just so appreciate the tone and the nature of what you shared. It makes total sense why God connected us the way that he did. And It wasn't just for what's led up to now, but for now and for everything that's going to continue on in the future. If you're out there and you're listening and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know if I'm struggling in an area, or I don't know if there's something that I'm holding on to and need to let go of, ask. John's contact information will obviously be in the show notes of the podcast episode. If you're listening, you probably know how to find me, but feel free to message me anywhere that you can find. I'm more than happy to help. This stuff is so important because not only do we need to step up and be men to right the world today, but we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our families, we owe it to our businesses, we owe it to our friends, and we owe it to every single person that we're going to come into contact with to be the men that God has created us to be. So with that, as always, thanks so much for listening. Be you, be happy, be authentic. Peace.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you are ready to live the life you've dreamed of, I'm here to help. Head to ryanjamesmiller.com/podcast to begin your journey. And if this episode impacted you in any way, pay it forward by sharing it with someone you know. I'm Ryan James Miller, and I'll see you next time on Authentic Conversations.